Marriage. It's a promise of love, loyalty, and a future filled with hope. For Jack and Emma, their wedding was supposed to mark the beginning of a lifetime together. The perfect day. The perfect union. But as the world celebrated their love, a dark and forbidden truth was waiting to emerge, one that would shatter everything they thought they knew about each other. Behind the smiles, the vows, and the sparkling champagne, there was a secret buried deep in the past. A secret shared between the groom, Jack, and his bride's own mother, Victoria. It was a relationship that should have never existed, a connection that defied every boundary of trust and morality. For years they thought they had left it behind. For years they convinced themselves it was over. But the past has a way of returning when we least expect it. On the most sacred night of their lives, Victoria made one desperate move. And what followed was a moment of chaos that no one could undo. A confrontation that ended with her lifeless body on the floor, blood pooling beneath her head, and a family forever torn apart. What could have driven a man to such betrayal? How did a mother become the wedge in her daughter's marriage? And what really happened on that fateful wedding night? Today, we uncover the harrowing truth, a story of forbidden love, betrayal, and one final, deadly mistake. Victoria Green was the epitome of grace and resilience, a woman who carried herself with poise despite the tragedies life had dealt her. Years ago, she had lost her husband unexpectedly, a man who had been the cornerstone of her world. His passing left Victoria widowed in her early 40s, suddenly alone with the responsibility of raising their only daughter, Emma. Determined to provide the best for her child, Victoria threw herself into her role as a mother. She worked tirelessly, managing her late husband's estate and maintaining a lifestyle that allowed Emma to thrive. On the surface, she appeared strong, charming, and independent. Her striking beauty and effortless elegance made her a captivating presence in any room. But beneath her composed exterior was a woman grappling with profound loneliness and vulnerability. Victoria had built walls around her emotions, carefully concealing the ache of her solitude. She attended high society events not out of desire, but necessity, keeping up appearances and forging connections in a world that could often feel cold and unkind. It was at one of these events, a charity gala, that her life took an unexpected turn. Jack Benson was just 27 at the time, a young man brimming with ambition and charisma. He was working his way up in the business world, attending the gala as a representative of his employer, a close associate of Victoria's late husband. Jack's youthful energy stood out among the crowd of seasoned professionals and socialites, and Victoria couldn't help but notice him. Their first meeting was casual, a brief introduction, a polite exchange of pleasantries, but there was an undeniable spark. Jack was captivated by Victoria's confidence and sophistication, qualities that seemed beyond his years. For Victoria, Jack's presence was refreshing, a glimpse of vitality and charm that reminded her of the person she used to be before grief consumed her. As the evening progressed, they found themselves in deeper conversation, drawn to each other in a way neither could explain. Jack admired Victoria's intelligence and poise, while she was enchanted by his enthusiasm and charm. That night marked the beginning of a connection that would soon cross boundaries neither of them expected. What started as friendly exchanges quickly evolved into something more. Jack and Victoria began meeting regularly, first under the guise of business discussions, and later as casual companions. Dinners turned into long, intimate conversations, and their shared moments became a source of comfort for both. Jack found in Victoria a sense of stability and wisdom he hadn't encountered before, while Victoria saw Jack as a reminder of her youth, a chance to feel alive again. The lines blurred further with every encounter, and before long, their connection deepened into a full-fledged affair. For 2 years, their relationship remained a closely guarded secret. Jack became a frequent visitor to Victoria's home, where the walls of her opulent estate bore witness to their clandestine meetings. They spoke of everything, their pasts, their dreams, their fears, but avoided the one topic that loomed over them, the reality of their relationship. Jack, despite his feelings for Victoria, wrestled with the weight of what they were doing. He was acutely aware of the societal and moral implications of their affair. Victoria, too, knew the risks but was unwilling to let go of the solace Jack provided. Eventually, the pressure became too much for Jack to bear. His guilt grew unbearable, compounded by the knowledge that their relationship could never exist in the open. With a heavy heart, he ended the affair, telling Victoria they had to move on. She tried to understand, masking her heartbreak with grace, but the pain was undeniable. They parted ways with an unspoken promise to bury their connection in the past, believing it was the only way forward. For Jack, it was a decision made out of necessity. For Victoria, it was the end of a chapter that had given her fleeting happiness in an otherwise lonely life. But the past has a way of resurfacing when least expected, and for Jack and Victoria, their story was far from over. Years passed, and Jack Benson's life had taken a new direction. No longer the inexperienced young man who had been swept up in an affair, he was now a confident and successful professional. In his early 30s, established himself in his career, building a reputation for his work ethic and charm. Though he had left his relationship with Victoria behind, its memory lingered like a shadow, one he was determined to never revisit. It was during a friend's party that Jack met Emma Green. She was everything he admired, warm, intelligent, and full of life. Emma's natural kindness stood out in the room, and Jack couldn't help but feel drawn to her. Their connection was instant. A casual conversation over drinks quickly turned into a night of shared stories and laughter, leaving both with a sense of excitement they hadn't felt in a long time. For Jack, Emma represented a fresh start, someone untainted by the complexities of his past. He admired her for her independence and her genuine approach to life. For Emma, Jack's confidence and attentiveness were qualities that set him apart. It wasn't long before their relationship began to blossom. Jack and Emma's romance unfolded effortlessly. They shared a sense of humor, a love for adventure, and an appreciation for each other's ambitions. Within months, they were inseparable, and Jack found himself envisioning a future with her. It felt right in a way he hadn't experienced before. He was finally ready to move forward. Emma had spoken fondly of her mother, Victoria, on many occasions. She described her as an elegant and supportive figure who had always been her rock. When it came time to introduce Jack to her mother, Emma was filled with excitement, eager for the two people she cared about most to meet. The day of their introduction was marked by an atmosphere of polite enthusiasm, but the moment Jack laid eyes on Victoria again, his heart sank. Sitting in the living room of the Green family's estate, he felt an overwhelming wave of discomfort. Victoria, as poised and graceful as ever, locked eyes with him, her expression unreadable. For Emma's sake, both Jack and Victoria played their roles seamlessly. They exchanged polite pleasantries, each pretending it was the first time they had met. But beneath the surface, the tension was undeniable. Jack's mind raced, grappling with the reality of the situation, while Victoria maintained an air of calm, though her gaze lingered just a little too long. As the evening progressed, Victoria's composed demeanor gave way to subtle moments of discomfort. Jack noticed her watching him intently, as if searching for a sign of acknowledgement. He avoided her gaze, speaking directly to Emma and steering the conversation away from anything that might reveal their shared history. For Jack, the evening was a surreal experience, one that left him with more questions than answers. What was Victoria thinking? Did she see this as an opportunity to reopen old wounds? And most importantly, would their secret remain buried? In the months that followed, Jack found himself in an increasingly precarious position. Victoria, now a constant presence in his life through Emma, was a reminder of a chapter he had tried to leave behind. He went out of his way to avoid being alone with her, carefully navigating family gatherings and dinners to ensure their interactions remained brief and superficial. But Victoria's feelings were not as easily contained. Seeing Jack with Emma stirred emotions she thought she had buried. She couldn't help but compare herself to her daughter, feeling a pang of jealousy each time she saw them together. In her mind, Jack had once been hers, a connection she had nurtured and cherished. Now, Emma was the one sharing the life she had once envisioned for herself. Victoria's growing unease began to manifest in subtle ways. She would offer pointed comments during conversations, veiled in politeness but laced with underlying tension. She became more protective of Emma, often suggesting she deserved someone who truly valued her. To Emma, these moments seemed like a mother's concern, but Jack recognized them for what they were, a reminder that Victoria had not let go of their past. Jack, meanwhile, was determined to keep his relationship with Emma separate from his history with Victoria. But the weight of the situation was beginning to show. He became more guarded, his once carefree demeanor replaced by moments of quiet reflection. Emma noticed the change, but attributed it to stress, never suspecting the true cause. Victoria's jealousy deepened, and with it, her perception of Emma shifted. She began to see her daughter not as the vibrant young woman she had raised, but as the person who had taken what she believed was rightfully hers. Her composure was slipping, and the tension between her and Jack was growing harder to conceal. Unspoken emotions lingered in the air, creating a sense of unease that neither Jack nor Victoria could ignore. For Emma, everything seemed perfect. But for Jack and Victoria, the cracks in their carefully constructed facade were becoming impossible to hide. The closer the wedding day approached, the more Victoria's emotions spiraled out of control. What began as subtle attempts to reconnect with Jack became increasingly calculated and deliberate. She started by finding ways to isolate him during family events, brief moments in the kitchen, quiet conversations on the balcony, and offers to help with wedding preparations. Each encounter was carefully orchestrated to create opportunities for them to be alone. Victoria's words, while polite on the surface, carried an undertone of longing and regret. She reminded Jack of the connection they had shared, cloaking her intentions in nostalgia. "It's funny, isn't it?" she'd say with a wistful smile. "How time changes so much, but some things, some feelings, remain." Jack, uncomfortable but determined to keep the peace, deflected her advances at every turn. He was resolute in his commitment to Emma and refused to engage with Victoria's veiled insinuations. Still, her persistence wore on him, creating an atmosphere of unease that he couldn't shake. As the wedding date drew nearer, Victoria's subtlety began to unravel. During one particularly tense moment, she confronted Jack directly. It was late one evening after a family dinner, and Emma had gone to bed early, leaving Victoria and Jack alone in the living room. Victoria's voice trembled as she spoke, the mask of composure she had worn for months slipping away. "Jack, we need to talk," she said, her tone heavy with urgency. Jack hesitated, sensing the shift in her demeanor. "Victoria, I don't think there's anything we need to discuss." But Victoria pressed on, stepping closer. "Please, Jack, just hear me out. I know we've both moved on, but I can't stop thinking about what we had. It wasn't just some fleeting thing. You know that." Jack shook his head, his voice firm. "That was a long time ago, Victoria. It's over. I'm marrying Emma, and that's all that matters now." Her expression hardened, a mix of hurt and anger flashing across her face. "You can't just erase the past, Jack. You can't pretend it didn't mean anything." Jack's patience snapped. "I'm not pretending, Victoria. I made my choice years ago, and I'm making it again now. This conversation is over." Victoria stared at him, her face pale and her lips trembling. Without another word, she turned and walked away, but the look in her eyes was unmistakable. Humiliation, fury, and an unmistakable sense of betrayal. For Jack, the weeks leading up to the wedding were anything but joyous. What should have been a time of excitement and anticipation had become a waking nightmare. His anxiety grew with every interaction with Victoria, the weight of their shared secret pressing heavily on his shoulders. Every glance she cast his way felt loaded with meaning, every word she spoke a potential threat to the life he was building with Emma. Jack found himself constantly on edge, second-guessing every decision and replaying conversations in his mind. His greatest fear was that Victoria would reveal the truth to Emma, shattering the woman he loved and destroying their future before it even began. Emma, ever attentive, noticed the changes in Jack's demeanor. She asked him if he was feeling overwhelmed by the wedding preparations, and he would always respond with a reassuring smile and a quick, "just the usual nerves." But inside, he was anything but calm. Victoria's desperation only heightened his unease. She began to find more reasons to call him, under the guise of discussing wedding details. Her texts and calls, though polite in tone, carried an underlying tension that Jack couldn't ignore. One evening, Victoria left Jack a voicemail that made his blood run cold. Her voice was soft, almost pleading. "Jack, I know you're busy, but I just wanted to say, I've been thinking about us, about everything. I need to see you one last time before the wedding. Please." Jack deleted the message immediately, his hands trembling. He knew he couldn't entertain her request, but the very fact that she had made it left him rattled. What was Victoria planning? Was she going to confront Emma? Expose their past? The possibilities gnawed at him, keeping him awake at night. The closer the wedding day came, the more Jack felt the walls closing in. He threw himself into wedding preparations with an intensity that surprised Emma, trying to distract himself from the turmoil within. But no matter how hard he tried, the shadow of Victoria loomed large. Unbeknownst to Jack, Victoria's desperation was reaching a breaking point. In her mind, Emma was now the obstacle standing between her and the life she believed she deserved. She couldn't let go of the idea that Jack had been hers first, that their connection had been something unique and irreplaceable. Her feelings of jealousy and betrayal festered, transforming into something darker. As the wedding day approached, Jack's anxiety and Victoria's desperation collided, setting the stage for the tragedy that would forever change their lives. It was a day straight out of a storybook. The sun bathed the garden venue in a golden glow. The scent of fresh flowers filled the air, and soft music played as guests took their seats. Emma was breathtaking in her lace gown, her radiant smile capturing the hearts of everyone around her. Jack, standing tall in his tailored suit, looked every bit the devoted groom, his eyes fixed on Emma as she walked down the aisle. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple. Their vows, heartfelt and emotional, left the crowd misty-eyed. Friends and family clapped and cheered as the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and Jack sealed it with a tender kiss. For a moment, it seemed as though nothing could taint their happiness. But Jack's heart wasn't at ease. Beneath the smiles and laughter, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had been building for weeks. Victoria's presence at the wedding added a layer of tension he could feel even in the warmest moments. During the reception, Jack found himself hyper-aware of Victoria's every movement. She floated through the crowd with her usual grace, chatting with guests and offering a warm smile to anyone who approached her. To others, she appeared the picture of elegance. But Jack noticed the way her eyes lingered on him whenever their paths crossed. The subtle glances that felt like unspoken messages. At one point, as Jack stood near the bar, Victoria approached him. She held a glass of champagne in one hand, her expression calm, but her voice tinged with something Jack couldn't quite place. "You've outdone yourself, Jack," she said, her words dripping with double meaning. Jack's response was curt. "Thank you, Victoria. I hope you're enjoying the day." He quickly excused himself, retreating to Emma's side, hoping she hadn't noticed the tension. Emma, blissfully unaware, was immersed in the joy of the occasion. She danced, laughed, and basked in the love of her family and friends, while Jack tried to push down the knot in his stomach. Victoria, meanwhile, kept her distance, but never let Jack out of her sight. As the evening wound down, guests began to bid farewell, leaving Jack and Emma to their long-awaited first night as husband and wife. They retreated to their luxurious bridal suite, a room adorned with rose petals and soft candlelight. Emma, radiant even after a long day, kissed Jack on the cheek and excused herself to the bathroom to freshen up. Jack sat on the edge of the bed, his tie loosened, trying to gather his thoughts. The events of the day had been overwhelming, but there was something else, an unease that wouldn't leave him. He told himself it was just exhaustion, the weight of weeks of planning finally catching up to him. But then came the knock. It was soft at first, almost hesitant, but persistent enough to grab Jack's attention. He frowned, glancing toward the bathroom to make sure Emma hadn't heard it. Rising from the bed, he opened the door and froze. There stood Victoria, dressed in an elegant gown that now seemed out of place. Her face was a mixture of desperation and determination, her eyes locking onto his. Before Jack could say a word, she stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Victoria, what are you doing here?" Jack whispered harshly, his voice laced with disbelief and anger. "Emma is right in the other room." "I had to see you," she replied, her voice trembling. "I couldn't let this day end without talking to you." "This is insane," Jack hissed, keeping his voice low. "You can't be here. Leave before Emma comes out." Victoria didn't move. Instead, she stepped closer, her expression softening into something that Jack could only describe as pleading. "Jack, please, just one last time. We can end this on our terms, not with you pretending it never happened." Jack's patience was unraveling. "Victoria, stop this. I told you. This is over. It's been over for years. I love Emma, and I'm not going to let you ruin this for us." But Victoria's desperation only deepened. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "You don't mean that, Jack. I know you don't. I see the way you look at me, the way you avoid me. You're afraid because you still feel it too. You still love me." "Enough," Jack snapped, his voice rising despite himself. "This has to end. Go back to your room before you destroy everything." Victoria's composure broke. Tears welled in her eyes as she reached out to him. "Jack, please, don't do this. Don't push me away like I mean nothing to you." Jack stepped back, his frustration boiling over into anger. "I'm not doing this, Victoria. Get out," he said, his voice firm and final. As Victoria moved closer, trying to grab his arm, Jack reacted instinctively. He pushed her away, harder than he intended. Victoria stumbled, her heel catching on the edge of the carpet. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down as she lost her balance. Her body twisted, and she fell backward, her head colliding with the corner of the heavy dresser with a sickening thud. The sound echoed in the room, followed by a deafening silence. Jack stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest as he stared at Victoria's motionless body. Blood began to pool beneath her head, a dark and chilling contrast against the pristine carpet. "Jack?" Emma's voice called from the bathroom, oblivious to the scene unfolding just feet away. "Is everything okay?" Jack's mind raced, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He couldn't move, couldn't think. All he could do was stare at the lifeless form of Victoria Green, her eyes wide open and unseeing. Emma stepped out of the bathroom with a bright smile, her hair loosely falling over her shoulders, her makeup touched up for the final moments of a perfect day. She paused when she saw Jack. He stood frozen by the bed, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and disbelief. "Jack?" she asked softly, her smile fading. "What's wrong?" Jack didn't answer. His gaze darted between Emma and the corner of the room, where Victoria's lifeless body lay crumpled on the floor. Emma followed his line of sight, her brow furrowing in confusion as she stepped closer. "What is it, Jack?" she pressed, her tone growing concerned. Then she saw it. The room seemed to shift as Emma's eyes fell on the figure of her mother. Victoria's elegant gown was stained with blood that seeped onto the carpet, her head tilted unnaturally. Emma's hands flew to her mouth and a muffled scream escaped her lips. "Mom?" she stammered, her voice breaking. What happened?" Emma rushed to her mother's side, dropping to her knees beside the still form. She shook Victoria gently, her hands trembling. "Mom, wake up! Please wake up!" she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Jack took a step forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Emma, I know." Emma's voice cut through the air, sharp and filled with panic. She turned to face Jack, her eyes wild with fear and desperation. "What happened? Tell me what happened!" Jack's words caught in his throat. He opened his mouth to speak, but found no explanation that could lessen the horror of the moment. The weight of the truth bore down on him as he stood there, helpless, watching the woman he loved fall apart. Emma's anguished cries echoed through the suite, loud enough to draw the attention of hotel staff. Within minutes, there was a knock at the door, followed by the muffled voices of concerned employees. Jack hesitated for a moment before walking to the door and opening it slightly. "Is everything okay in here?" a hotel manager asked, his tone cautious but firm. Jack couldn't find the words. He stepped aside, allowing the manager to see inside the room. The sight of Victoria's body on the floor was enough to send the staff member into action. Within moments, the police were called, and the once intimate bridal suite became a crime scene. The arrival of the authorities brought an air of cold efficiency to the chaos. Officers cordoned off the room, taking photos, collecting evidence, and asking questions. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, clutching a blanket around her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the floor. She hadn't spoken since the police arrived, her mind too overwhelmed to process what was happening. Jack, seated across the room, was pale and trembling. When the officers turned their attention to him, he knew there was no point in hiding the truth. The weight of his guilt pressed down on him, and under the intensity of their questioning, the story spilled out. I didn't mean for this to happen, Jack said, his voice cracking. She came to the room. She wouldn't leave. I told her to go, but she... He stopped, shaking his head as tears welled in his eyes. It was an accident, I swear. I didn't mean to hurt her. The officers exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable as they recorded Jack's account. Each word felt like a dagger to his chest, the reality of his actions sinking in deeper with every sentence. As the confession unfolded, Emma lifted her head, her tear-streaked face a mask of disbelief. "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice trembling. "She came to the room? Why? Why was she even here?" Jack hesitated, unable to meet her gaze. "Emma, there's something you don't know." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Emma's expression shifted from confusion to suspicion, and then to horror as the pieces began to fall into place. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, Jack. Tell me it's not what I think it is." Jack's silence was answer enough. "You had an affair with her, didn't you?" Emma's voice cracked, her words barely audible but laced with devastation. "With my mother?" Jack tried to speak, but Emma didn't wait for an explanation. She stood, her legs unsteady, and pointed an accusatory finger at him. "How could you?" she screamed. "How could you do this to me, to her, to us?" Her sobs filled the room as she collapsed onto the bed, her body shaking with the weight of her grief. Jack reached out to her, but she recoiled, her voice rising in anger. "Don't touch me. Don't you dare touch me." For Emma, the betrayal was incomprehensible. The man she had loved and trusted had not only lied to her, but had been involved with the person she trusted most, her own mother. The tragedy of her mother's death was compounded by the revelation of the affair, a truth that shattered every foundation of her life. In that moment, Emma's heartbreak turned to silence, a numbness taking over as she stared blankly ahead. The man she thought she knew was now a stranger, and the world she had built with him had crumbled beyond repair. Secrets are a fragile foundation for any life, and for Jack, Emma, and Victoria, they became the fault line that shattered everything. What began as a hidden relationship between Jack and Victoria spiraled into a web of betrayal, heartbreak, and irreversible tragedy. Their choices, the lies they told, the emotions they suppressed, and the boundaries they crossed, set the stage for a night that would destroy them all. This story serves as a haunting reminder of the devastating consequences of unresolved secrets. The past, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of resurfacing, and when it does, it demands a price. For Jack, it was his future with Emma. For Emma, it was her trust and the loss of her mother. And for Victoria, it was her life. For Jack, Emma, and Victoria, the past was never truly buried, and on one fateful night, it destroyed everything. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.